June 6th, 1944, Normandy, France. The early morning fog hung thick over the coastline, the sea barely visible as we stood at our defensive positions overlooking the beaches. It was supposed to be a quiet day, but that silence was broken by the distant rumble of engines. I squinted through the mist, my heart pounding harder than ever. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw them ships, not just a few. Hundreds, maybe thousands, stretching across the horizon like a steel wall, approaching us slowly, but with purpose. "Here they come," one of my comrades muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the sound of the growing engine noise. I felt a knot form in my stomach as the realization sank in. This was it. The invasion we had been preparing for, but secretly hoped, would never come. Suddenly, the sky roared to life. Planes, more than I could count, buzzed overhead like a swarm of angry bees, dropping their bombs on our defenses. Explosions rocked the ground beneath my feet, and dirt and debris flew in every direction. The bunker shook, and I gripped my rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had never experienced anything like this before. The sheer power of the Allied assault was overwhelming, and it hadn't even begun in full yet. "Hold your positions," our commander shouted, trying to rally us. But we were already scattered, some of the men frozen with fear, others scrambling to take cover as shells rained down around us. The bombardment went on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then, through the smoke and chaos, I saw the landing crafts opening like jaws, and men pouring out, wave after wave of soldiers running towards the beaches. The water turned red as the first wave was cut down by our machine guns, but still, they kept coming. Their sheer numbers were staggering. It felt like an endless tide of men and machines, and no matter how hard we fired, they kept advancing. I could see the fear in the eyes of the younger soldiers around me. They were barely more than boys, some of them probably seeing combat for the first time. I was no stranger to war, but even I felt an icy grip of terror as the Allied forces closed in. Our once impenetrable defenses had been reduced to rubble, and the gunfire and explosions created a deafening symphony of destruction. We tried to hold our positions, but the Allied soldiers were relentless. They had air support, naval bombardment, and tanks that tore through our lines like paper. I ducked as a shell exploded nearby, sending chunks of concrete and metal flying through the air. The smell of gunpowder, sweat, and blood filled my nostrils as I crawled behind a half-destroyed wall, trying to catch my breath. By midday, we were being pushed back further inland. What was left of our unit was scattered across the countryside, desperately trying to regroup. Our communications had been knocked out in the first wave of the attack, and we were fighting blind, cut off from reinforcements, and unsure of what was happening elsewhere along the coast. I saw officers shouting orders, but even they seemed unsure of what to do. In the late afternoon, we retreated to a nearby village, hoping to regroup. The Allies were closing in from all sides, and we had lost so many men already. The once proud and disciplined Wehrmacht seemed to be crumbling under the weight of this unstoppable invasion. It was then, for the first time, I felt the sharp sting of realization this could be the end. Not just of the battle, but of everything we had fought for. The war was turning against us, and Normandy was the beginning of the end. June 7th, 1944, Normandy, France. The night had been long, and the sounds of battle never really stopped. Even in the darkness, the sky was lit by flares and the distant thud of artillery. We hadn't slept. How could we? Most of us were huddled together in the remains of an old farmhouse, just a few kilometers inland from the beaches where we had been pushed back. The walls were cracked, and the roof barely held together, but it was the only shelter we had. The smell of smoke and burning oil filled the air. Outside, the occasional distant explosion shook the ground. No one spoke much. We were too tired, too scared, and too defeated to say anything. Some of the younger soldiers stared blankly into the fire we had managed to light, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and fear. I couldn't stop thinking about what we had seen yesterday. The endless waves of Allied soldiers, their equipment, Their planes, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It was hard to believe that only 2 days ago we had been convinced we could hold the beaches. Now, everything had changed. At dawn, we received orders to fall back again. The Allies were advancing faster than anyone had expected, and our higher command was scrambling to set up new defensive lines. I heard whispers among the men. Some were already talking about surrender, others about desertion. No one dared say it too loudly, but the thought was there, hanging over us like a dark cloud. We gathered what little ammunition and supplies we had left and prepared to move. The roads were a mess of retreating troops, broken vehicles, and wounded men. We had no choice but to join the endless column heading deeper into the French countryside. It was a slow, agonizing retreat. The roads were clogged with traffic, and every few kilometers, the sound of planes above would send us scrambling for cover as the Allies strafed and bombed anything that moved. I will never forget the moment we passed a small village, the smell of burning wood and gasoline heavy in the air. The place had been shelled to pieces. The once quaint homes were nothing but piles of rubble, and the bodies of civilians lay scattered on the streets. I turned away, unable to look. War had a way of dehumanizing everything, of turning life into something cheap and disposable. But seeing that innocent people caught in the crossfire, it hit me harder than any battle ever could. As we pushed further inland, morale sank lower and lower. We had no idea what was happening elsewhere, no word from command, no clear objective other than to retreat and regroup. Rumors spread that the Americans and British had broken through our lines in several places, that the entire front was collapsing. Some said the SSS was going to make a stand, that reinforcements were on the way, but none of us really believed it. The truth was, we were alone, outnumbered, and outgunned. By the time we reached our next defensive position, it was late in the afternoon. We were told to dig in, to prepare for another Allied push, but we knew it wouldn't hold. We were exhausted, demoralized, and running out of supplies. Our equipment was breaking down, our ranks thinned by casualties, and the constant fear of being bombed or strafed from above made every minute feel like an eternity. We waited in those hastily dug trenches for what felt like hours, listening to the distant rumble of tanks and artillery getting closer. My hands shook as I gripped my rifle. I wasn't alone. Everyone was scared, but no one wanted to admit it. We were soldiers of the Wehrmacht, after all, supposed to be the elite. But the truth was, we were just men tired, terrified, and unsure if we would make it through the day. Suddenly, the ground shook with the force of artillery fire. The attack had begun. The shells exploded all around us, sending dirt and debris flying through the air. I ducked down into the trench as pieces of earth rained down on my helmet. The sound was deafening, and I could barely hear the shouts of my comrades over the roar of the guns. We fired back, but it was hopeless. The Allied artillery was relentless, pounding our positions with a fury I had never seen before. Then, through the smoke, I saw them again. The silhouettes of Allied tanks and infantry moving towards us, just like on the beaches. They were coming, and there was nothing we could do to stop them. The order came to fall back once more. We scrambled out of the trenches, running for our lives as the enemy closed in. The retreat was chaotic, men running in every direction, some wounded, others throwing down their weapons in desperation. I barely made it out of there alive, my heart pounding in my chest as I ran through the fields, the sounds of gunfire and explosions ringing in my ears. As night fell once again, we found ourselves even further from where we had started. The retreat continued, and there was no telling where it would end. But deep down, I knew the truth. The war was lost, and it was only a matter of time before everything we had fought for came crashing down around us.